Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Audra Charles had always been a woman of schemes, secrets, and strategies, but nothing could have prepared Genoa City for the thunderstorm she was about to unleash when she stunned everyone with a shocking announcement that sent ripples of disbelief through the elite corridors of power. She was pregnant. The declaration alone, uttered in her signature sultry and unapologetic tone, would have been enough to leave boardrooms buzzing, households whispering, and rivals plotting their next moves, but what made the revelation even more explosive was the whispered question that followed almost immediately: was it real? Or was this just another one of Audra's master manipulations designed to tug at Nate Hastings' heartstrings and pull him back into her orbit? For weeks, Nate had been distancing himself from Audra, unable to fully reconcile the ambition-driven chaos she often carried into his world with the calm, stable, and honest life he envisioned for himself. But Audra, determined not to lose him and even more determined not to watch him drift back toward Elena Dawson or worse, fall deeper into the gravitational pull of Victoria Newman, devised what she thought was the perfect plan: a pregnancy, the ultimate tie that binds, a move so bold that it could cut through Nate's walls of resistance and rekindle his sense of responsibility, duty, and yes, even love. With every calculated glance and every dramatic pause before uttering the life-altering words, Audra painted herself as a woman standing on the precipice of a new chapter, and yet beneath that composed exterior was a tempest of fear, desperation, and the ever-present possibility of her entire facade crumbling into dust should anyone dare to probe deeper into the truth. The night Audra chose to drop the bombshell was anything but coincidental. It was during a Newman corporate cocktail party, an event where power, prestige, and perception were everything. She wore a fitted dress that accentuated her figure but was loose enough at the waist to make the imagination run wild, her subtle hand resting on her abdomen every so often, as though hinting at something more. Whispers followed her every movement, and by the time she casually took Nate aside, leading him toward the balcony under the guise of a private conversation, half the room already suspected that Genoa City was about to witness another classic Audra Charles move. With the city skyline glittering behind them, Audra let the words tumble from her lips in a calculated blend of vulnerability and determination. "Nate. I'm pregnant." For a split second, the air seemed to freeze around them, and Nate's normally composed expression faltered, his eyes widening in a mixture of shock, confusion, and something deeper, something that suggested he was already grappling with the implications of her revelation. Was it true? Could it be real? Or was this yet another trick meant to hold him in her grasp? Nate's medical background gave him a sharp instinct for truth, but his emotional ties to Audra left him tangled in the kind of web where facts and feelings blurred until he could no longer see the clear path forward. Inside the party, Victor Newman himself raised a brow as he observed the scene from afar, whispering something to Nikki about Audra's latest game. Victoria, sipping her wine, felt an undeniable pang of curiosity mixed with irritation, because deep down she knew that Audra announcing a pregnancy, whether genuine or fabricated, would complicate every single plan she had in motion, particularly when it came to Nate's allegiance. Meanwhile, Elena, though not present at the gathering, would soon hear the news through Genoa City's ever-turning grapevine, and when she did, her heart would sink with both jealousy and suspicion. As for Audra, she reveled in the immediate attention, but beneath her mask of control, she was already sweating over the details. If Nate demanded proof, if the Newmans pressed too hard, if Elena started investigating, her perfect story could unravel faster than she could spin her next lie. Still, Audra had always thrived on playing with fire, and this was no different. In her mind, the risk was worth it, because what she stood to gain was not just Nate's affection but also the kind of security and influence that came from aligning herself with him in both business and family. For Audra, this pregnancy, real or fake, was her golden ticket, her trump card, her last chance to cement her place in Nate's life before he slipped through her fingers forever. As the days unfolded after the announcement, Nate found himself haunted by questions he couldn't shake. He replayed the moment Audra spoke the words over and over in his head, searching for signs of manipulation, yet simultaneously feeling the tug of paternal instinct and the moral obligation he knew would weigh on him if it were true. Could Audra really be carrying his child? Would he walk away and risk abandoning his own blood? Or would he embrace this unexpected twist and, in doing so, open the door to rekindling the passion and connection he once felt with Audra? For Audra, every interaction with Nate became a carefully orchestrated performance. She lingered on tender gestures, strategically placed her hand on her stomach when he looked her way, and wove stories about her hopes for the future as though she were already preparing him to step into the role of father. But what she couldn't control were the cracks forming beneath the surface, Nate's intuition telling him something wasn't quite right, Victoria's growing suspicion that Audra's scheme was aimed not only at Nate's heart but also at destabilizing Newman Enterprises, and the looming possibility that a single slip, a missed appointment, a forged sonogram, an overheard conversation, could expose the truth in devastating fashion. But the more Audra leaned into her elaborate charade, the heavier the weight of her lies pressed against her chest, because behind the dazzling smile and sly look she cast at Nate, she knew she was walking on the thinnest of tightropes, and one misstep could send her crashing down into a scandal that would ruin everything she had clawed her way to achieve. The most dangerous part of Audra's gambit wasn't just keeping Nate convinced, it was managing the ripple effects that spread outward into Genoa City's powerful circles, because once she announced she was pregnant, she lost control over how the information traveled, twisted, and became fodder for rival agendas. Already, whispers circulated in the Newman boardrooms, with Victor ordering Michael Baldwin to quietly look into Audra's recent medical records, while Victoria subtly pressed Nate with pointed questions disguised as concern. Are you sure about this, Nate? Have you seen the tests? Do you believe her? And though Nate remained guarded, the seeds of doubt had been planted. Even Elena, though she told herself she was done with Nate, found herself obsessively replaying the news, torn between anger that Audra had once again slithered into Nate's world and pity that he might be falling victim to yet another of Audra's traps. Still, Audra's genius lay in her ability to turn suspicion into sympathy, and every time Nate confronted her with a probing look, she responded with just enough vulnerability, a trembling voice, a mist of tears in her eyes, or a softly spoken line about the little life growing inside her, to keep him second-guessing his doubts. She painted pictures of a future that didn't just involve the two of them but an entire family, making Nate imagine late-night feedings, tiny hands gripping his finger, and the kind of domestic life he secretly craved but never dared to fully admit, and it was in those fleeting moments that his resolve cracked, that his heart softened, and that Audra's ploy seemed dangerously close to succeeding. Yet the closer Nate drifted back toward her, the more entangled Audra became in her own deception, because she knew that the more she played the role of expectant mother, the harder it would be to maintain the illusion when people demanded tangible proof. At first, she managed with vague comments about being early in the pregnancy, about not wanting to jinx anything by rushing into appointments, but as weeks passed, she realized she would need something concrete, doctor visits, test results, perhaps even an ultrasound, and the thought sent icy fear down her spine. Audra had always been a master manipulator, but this game required more than charm and half-truths, it required forging an entire reality, and she knew that Nate, with his medical background, would be the toughest critic of all. More than once she found herself cornered by his subtle inquiries, "When's your next checkup? Do you want me to come with you?" And each time she wriggled out with a plausible excuse, but even she knew she couldn't dodge him forever. To buy herself time, she doubled down on emotional manipulation, crafting stories about her dreams for the baby, letting her hand linger on Nate's arm when she described how much she wanted their child to have his integrity, his compassion, his strength. The irony, of course, was that Nate had been pulling away from her precisely because of her lack of integrity, and yet now, by inventing this unborn child, she was exploiting his greatest strength, his loyalty and sense of responsibility, as the hook to reel him back in. What Audra didn't anticipate, however, was how much her announcement would ignite rivalries beyond Nate himself. Victoria Newman, though outwardly cordial, felt a sharp pang of jealousy whenever she saw Nate and Audra together, and that jealousy morphed into ruthless determination when she realized that if Nate truly believed Audra was carrying his child, his priorities would shift away from Newman Enterprises. For Victoria, Audra wasn't just a romantic rival, she was a business threat, and Victoria vowed to dismantle Audra's scheme before it could jeopardize her empire. She began probing quietly, enlisting the help of Newman's resources to discreetly track Audra's movements, cross-check her medical visits, and dig into her background for inconsistencies. Meanwhile, Victor, who had always admired Audra's ambition but never fully trusted her, began treating her like a chess piece he could move, manipulate, or remove altogether, and when Victor Newman set his sights on exposing someone, history proved that secrets rarely stayed buried for long. Despite the storm brewing around her, Audra clung to her plan with almost obsessive determination, telling herself over and over that if she could just make Nate believe, if she could just hold him long enough, eventually the fantasy would become reality. She imagined a future where Nate embraced her, where Elena faded into the background, where Victoria turned her attention elsewhere, and where she stood proudly as not only Nate's partner but the mother of his child. And in some twisted way, she began to believe her own lie, rehearsing it so often that it became ingrained in her psyche, blurring the line between performance and truth. But Genoa City had a way of pulling the mask off even the most skilled liars, and every day brought new threats to her carefully constructed illusion. A slip of the tongue when she mentioned symptoms that didn't align with her supposed stage of pregnancy, a suspicious glance from Nate when her story didn't quite add up, or the simple fact that in a city where everyone thrived on secrets, someone was always watching. The tension between Audra and Nate escalated to a breaking point one evening when he confronted her more directly, his medical instincts overriding his emotions. "Audra, I need to know the truth," he told her, his voice steady but his eyes searching hers with an intensity that nearly cracked her composure. "If you're really pregnant with my child, then I deserve to be part of this from the very beginning. No more excuses. No more delays." Audra, caught in the headlights of his demand, summoned every ounce of her acting skills to look him in the eye and whisper, "I'm scared, Nate. I've lost before, and I don't want to lose again. I thought if I kept it quiet, if I waited, maybe I could protect this baby, protect us." It was a masterstroke of manipulation, weaving just enough truth, her real fear of losing him, with the falsehood of the pregnancy to keep him tethered, but even as he pulled her into his arms, comforting her with promises that they would face it together, Audra felt the clock ticking louder than ever. How long before he insisted on going with her to an appointment? How long before Victoria uncovered her lack of medical records? How long before Elena, with her connections at the hospital, discovered the truth? In the weeks that followed, Audra lived on edge, each day a delicate balancing act between maintaining the facade and preparing for the moment it all came crashing down. She avoided doctors' offices, deleted suspicious messages, and even considered bribing someone in the medical field to back her story, but every step carried enormous risk. And as the walls closed in, she couldn't help but ask herself whether she had gone too far, whether this lie, this massive, life-altering lie, would truly deliver the love and security she craved or whether it would leave her more alone and exposed than ever before. Nate's affection seemed to flicker like a candle in the wind, sometimes leaning toward her with genuine warmth, other times pulling back with guarded suspicion, and Audra knew that no matter how convincing she was, the truth had a way of clawing its way to the surface. The real question wasn't whether her secret would be exposed, but when, and whether by then she would have already lost Nate forever or managed, by some miracle, to entangle him so deeply that even the revelation of her deception wouldn't set him free. But as much as Audra tried to steady her composure, the gnawing truth was that her entire charade was beginning to spiral out of her control, because in Genoa City, lies didn't stay contained, they spread, mutated, and drew predators like sharks to blood in the water, and even though she had always prided herself on her ability to outwit her enemies, she was quickly realizing that this pregnancy scheme was far more volatile than anything she had ever attempted before. Every passing day tightened the noose around her because she wasn't just fighting to win Nate's heart, she was fighting against the relentless scrutiny of the Newman family, the suspicions of a scorned Elena, and the calculating eyes of Victor Newman, who was no stranger to dismantling ambitious women who dared to manipulate one of his pawns. Victor, with his cold smile and sharper mind, had already instructed his investigators to discreetly track Audra's medical appointments, or rather, the lack thereof, and the results were not only troubling but also ripe for exploitation, and while he kept that knowledge close to his chest, he relished the idea of cornering Audra at just the right moment, perhaps in front of Nate, to expose her duplicity in the most devastating way possible. Meanwhile, Victoria, though more subtle in her tactics, was seething behind her polished exterior, because she knew Audra's announcement threatened to derail everything she had carefully built with Nate, and worse, it stoked insecurities she had worked hard to bury, the fear that no matter how powerful she became, no matter how much wealth or influence she wielded, she could still lose to a younger, hungrier woman willing to play dirtier than she ever could. So Victoria began weaving her own counter-strategy, one that involved feeding Nate just enough suspicion to keep him questioning Audra while simultaneously positioning herself as the more stable, honest alternative, a woman who wouldn't manipulate him with fake promises of family but who could instead offer him loyalty, partnership, and the backing of the Newman Empire. And yet, Audra's brilliance lay in her ability to sense the shifting tides and adapt with the swiftness of a predator cornered, because she knew that the only way to keep Nate from slipping away was to deepen the illusion, to make the pregnancy seem not just real but emotionally undeniable. She began leaving small traces, pregnancy books strategically placed on her coffee table, subtle mentions of cravings when dining with Nate, even feigned bouts of fatigue that gave him an excuse to fuss over her, and though these little performances might have seemed trivial to others, to Nate they carried weight, because he was a man who prided himself on responsibility, and each gesture reinforced the possibility that he was indeed about to become a father. But what Audra didn't count on was Nate's medical intuition kicking in with greater urgency. He wasn't just a lover wrestling with his emotions, he was a doctor, trained to notice inconsistencies, and it didn't escape him that Audra's so-called symptoms shifted too conveniently, that her timelines were vague, that her reluctance to schedule a prenatal appointment didn't align with the supposed concern of a first-time mother. Still, Nate's heart warred against his mind, and Audra leaned into that battle, exploiting his compassion every time he started to pull back, crafting moments of intimacy designed to blur his doubts, a quiet dinner where she talked about the kind of father he would be, a late-night phone call where she confessed her fears of being alone, a tender smile paired with her hand on her abdomen that made him question whether he was a fool for doubting her at all. But Genoa City is never kind to liars, and cracks were already forming in her story, cracks that widened each time someone else poked at her narrative. Elena, driven by a toxic cocktail of jealousy and lingering love for Nate, began asking questions at the hospital where she still had connections, quietly scanning patient records for Audra's name, and though she found nothing definitive, the absence itself spoke volumes, fueling her conviction that Audra was orchestrating yet another con. Determined to protect Nate, Elena debated confronting him directly but hesitated, knowing that if she miscalculated, she could push him further into Audra's arms. Instead, she resolved to gather undeniable proof, even if it meant stepping into morally gray territory to expose her rival. Meanwhile, Victoria turned to her father for counsel, and Victor, with his trademark smirk, reminded her that patience was the deadliest weapon. Let her hang herself with her own rope, he advised, and when she's dangling, we'll be there to cut her down. Victoria agreed, but inwardly, she wasn't content to wait, her pride demanded action, and she began plotting ways to corner Audra herself, perhaps by luring Nate into a situation where Audra's lies could be revealed under pressure. Still, in the midst of all this scheming, there was Nate, caught in the eye of the storm, his heart torn in 1,000 directions, because as much as he wanted to believe in Audra, as much as he felt the tug of responsibility toward the supposed life she carried, he couldn't shake the unease gnawing at him every time he caught her in a half-truth. He was a man divided, and that division made him vulnerable, and Audra, ever the strategist, knew exactly how to exploit it. She began weaving narratives about her childhood, about feeling